Man, I'm actually kind of excited to see Alice Cluster leave. There were plenty of stupid cards in that cluster, many of which helped define the meta up until the very last few weeks of Alice's place in New Frontiers. Of course, now we have our own new degenerate crap in Lapis, but that's beside the point. For a couple of weeks, we're only going to have access to the Reiya Cluster starter decks and Lapis Cluster while we wait for the first official set to drop. A lot of the starters are stuck in their own archetype, but others have some decent splash potential with older Lapis cards. My favorite of them all is the Fire Ruler, Kirik, who mixes well with certain Dragonoid cards to make him a pretty good beatstick in a J-Ruler deck. He also mixes well with red aggro and can be run as a support ruler for resonators like Sylvia, Molest, or even the new 2-cost Swiftness resonator that came in his own deck. I'm going to be talking about both builds for this video, but starting with the aggro deck since it's more straightforward. For aggro, we're putting most of the focus on our resonators and boosting them with Burning Awakening. Awakening is a 2-cost chant that can increase a resonator's attack and defense by 1k each, which is a pretty sizable buff in this game. There's a 5 strength counter restriction to it, but that isn't much of a hurdle for Kirik since he begins with 10 of them and can consistently refresh them to 10. The deck also doesn't lose too much if you have to fall behind a turn to restock counters, since most of the red Swiftness resonators are 3-cost or less. The deck does well when supplemented with other burn spells such as Lightning Strike or Blood Boil, which also doubles as a boost spell. Red-green is going to be the preferred stone base here, so you can get Sylvia out, but you can also get in some shenanigans with white by running Manifestation of Power to recover your boosted resonators. Since we're casting a lot of chants to back up our board, Fire Wizard makes a nice addition to the resonator lineup to make it easier to cast those chants. Red Riding Hood Rainbow to the Heavens is also a good inclusion, since she gains flying after turn 3, and prior to that gives you access to one of the strongest cheap removal spells in the game, Rainbow Arrow. Awakening Arrow does a nice 400 to your opponent's entire board, which can get rid of low-stat token walls or any other 1-cost resonator for that matter. The deck's major problem is its lack of draw and search power. Once Ancient Knights drops, hopefully this problem will be somewhat alleviated with Kirik's inset support, but until then you might need to rely on a copy or two of Kirik's partner to recycle Burning Awakening to close a game. Now for the Dragonoid deck. Since we're going to be using Kirik more than our resonators for this build, I'll go into a bit more about what he does. For starters, Kirik is a Dragonoid race ruler that makes use of strength counters to help cast various battle art chants. He can do Judgment for 2 fire and 1 other will, and flips over into a 12-10 Dragonoid with precision that generates even more strength counters when he flips. He has a built-in Lightning Strike effect, where he can remove 5 strength counters to deal 500 damage to a J-Ruler or Resonator. The ideal combo here is to flip when you have 10 counters on your ruler side, and then spend those when the refresh effect activates on your J-Ruler side. He'll always stock himself to 15, so you might as well try and remove threats with the free 1k damage he can do post-Judgment. Kirik is pretty well rounded as a ruler, mostly due to his support. Despite having to tap to refuel his strength counters, a few cards in his deck are set up to help him recover counters and not fall behind on stones. This deck focuses on using the Draconic Warrior in a mid-range style, going into control early and then shifting into more aggression as mid and late game approach. Huel Pig is one of the most important resonators in the deck. It's a 4/3 1-cost resonator that can banish itself to recover your ruler. I expect this guy to show up in a lot of interesting decks that can splash fire, but for us he's a tool to restock strength counters. There are only 2 chants in the deck that make use of strength counters, but they're both strong enough to warrant being 3 or 4 ofs each, due to their early game power. We're also not going to be running any of the strength counter generation cards in the deck, so Pig is our only way to restock outside of flipping over or skipping grabbing a stone. Most of our other resonators are there to provide hard aggression or support Kirik more. Sprinting Flame Horse is the only way to grant something swiftness now, and needs to be run at a decently high number since there's no effective search or draw power for it in fire. Mad Boar of Mount Huel is a pretty good aggressive 2-cost resonator. There aren't many cards in Lapis with swiftness and a decent stat spread like Boar, and First Strike guarantees that if your opponent tries to block him, that their blocker will probably die too. The only other resonator I would run would be 2 or 3 copies of Ryula. She's a great recovery option in the deck since she can remove Astral Status from Kirik if he dies, and she can also boost him when he's flipped over since her effect doesn't specify Dragonoid resonators. The main power play card for this deck is Dragon Power. It's a 2-cost quick cast chant with the ability to roll 1 die. Target J resonator gains XX, where X is the result of the roll times 100. If that target is a Dragonoid, it's also recovered. Thought Kirik swinging him for 12 was pretty good. How about an average of 3k? If you roll a 3 and chase this to Kirik's first swing, he'll recover, so he can attack again, gain the boost, and have it added to his first attack as well. While maybe it's not the most reliable of cards, it's certainly a strong one when combined with Kirik. You can run other boosting cards too, like Dreams of Flight, which let Kirik or anything else fly over your opponent's board. Since it has Remnant, you can cast it again from the grave to either try and cheat in some extra damage or fly in with 2 things if need be. Burn cards make for pretty good filler in this deck since they can help you get your opponent into lethal range for Kirik or edge out the last bit of damage you need to close a game. I'd say max out on Lightning Strike since it can double as a remove a card, and then go into either Blood Boil or Crimson Ray as needed, depending on if you want more aggressive strategies with boosting your Resonators, or Control if you find yourself fighting other aggro decks. The stone base for this deck is pretty straightforward. You can perfectly fit your will into whatever 2 colors you want, but you can alter things around pretty easily. I'd try to keep at least 7 sources of fire and light around if you choose to go with Dragon Power, Dreams of Flight, and the rest of the light package, with maybe 3 fire wind sources for something like Sylvia or Wind Secluded if you choose to try and splash more. These work better in the aggro deck though, since you'll probably just want to use red and green there in the first place. You can also just run Kirik straight mono red if you want, but you sacrifice a lot of your stronger tech options by doing so. I honestly think Kirik is the best ruler of all the starter deck options. He has pretty good stats on his J-Ruler side, and his counter mechanic is super strong when mixed with his chant lineup. He mixes well with the small amount of existing Dragonoid support, and can go either aggro or control pretty easily. Hopefully he'll continue to gain more support as the cluster goes on, because I'd like to see a mid-range deck stay consistently strong.